So, Todd McGowan, once again, thank you very much for joining me on Hermitix podcast.
James, always glad to be here. Great talking to you every time.
I really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. It makes me happy. It doesn't make me unhappy, which we'll get to. I genuinely look forward to it. I've been happy all day thinking I get to talk to Todd, a fellow bald man who sits in front of a... It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
We're going to be talking about your book, Embracing Alienation, Why We Shouldn't Try to Find Ourselves. Published this year by Repeater. And this is a book about alienation. The long story short of your thesis in this book is that alienation is good, that we shouldn't avoid it. Maybe that's probably a better way of putting it, is that we shouldn't avoid it. It should maybe saying it's good is the wrong way, but it shouldn't have these negative connotations. Would that be right?
Right, exactly. Which it has in almost every philosophical iteration, right? Like from Marxism to, I don't know, different kinds of liberalism to like and just in everyday parlance, right? Like if you say, "Oh, I'm alien," you're like, that's something I should try to avoid, and I'm trying to reverse that.
You're doing the Zizek reverse.
Yeah, I know.
Actually, it's the other way. Okay.
The other way.
I know you don't like this question, which is why I'm going to ask it, because I was thinking back to our previous conversations, and every time I've asked you this, you've basically said, I don't know, which is fair enough. Where did the book come from? Like, what's the origin?
No, I don't mind this question because I was talking to my spouse, we were somewhere and I'm like, God, I just feel like I don't fit in here at all. And she's like, well, haha, funny, you wrote a book called Embracing Alienation. So it's like probably the most personal book that I wrote, like a really, she thinks it's an attempt to justify my own like social existential position. So I felt alienated from the time I was a little boy. And so it was a way to, so it began when I was 5 probably. So yeah, it's a long way to get to it. So yeah. And I never felt like I could maybe write it before. And it's the book I probably wanted to write more than any other one.
Okay. There you go. There is a reason, finally. But again, it's a frustrating question because where do ideas come from, right? Like
usually my books just come from like they're kind of pieced together from things. Like I start working on one thing and then it kind of moves into something else, and then but this one, no, I had a real idea for it and I wrote it, and Repeater contacted me and asked me to write something, and so I said, okay, how about this? And they're like, great. And so it's one of the few books that I just wrote from the beginning. Like usually I have a bunch, like right now I probably have like 7 books that are in some various state of being done.
Yeah.
And this was one I didn't have. It just was like from the beginning, and it took me like, I don't know, 2 months to write. It really went fast. So
it's written in a really simple language as well.
Yeah, it's very simple. Yeah, I think that's simple. Right. It's very simple. Yeah.
Out of interest, you mentioned there when you were younger, you felt alienated. Did you jump from group to group to group? Because I did that. No, I did that for, like every time there was a communal thing, I was like, I'm 95% here, but it just isn't.
No, it was worse. Like I was sort of exiled, and I was constantly striving to get into the group. So this is my kind of self-help book to say, no, it's okay. It's okay to not fit into it.
But you're not. Well, we'll get to the idea of fitting in, but I don't think it's as simple as saying, because that would be dangerous. I think to say, oh, if you don't fit in anywhere, just be lonely or sort of just solitude. No. You're not saying that. Let's begin with it's a boring way to begin, but let's begin with a definition. Like, how do you define alienation? As you said, we've accepted this word, we've accepted the negative connotations, has a long history, but you're not really redefining it in this book either.
No, not at all.
Okay, so how would you define alienation?
No, I think it means 2 things. So I think it means, first of all, it means a distance from yourself. Right? Like there's an internal distance that you have. And then that also implies a distance from any kind of potential group that you could belong to, that would give you a sense that like, okay, here I can really find myself. So alienation to me, and I talk about this in the book, is in contrast to identity, right? Like identity is something that's, you have it, you're equal to yourself if you feel like you have an identity. And alienation is precisely that self-divide, that doesn't allow for that.
But I mean, and these are things that you immediately really take all of these assumptions to court, and this is why, and I will say this now, because you joked in one of our last conversations about how I think a couple of your friends said that your work's really like, this is all Buddhist, which is why I said in the email, I said like, this is your most Buddhist book, which we'll get to. But because the first question really is, okay, if alienation is distance from self, there's sort of a presupposed foundationalism there, right? Or a presupposed foundation of like, you are away from something that is, but really this is the first thing that between the lines you're taking to court. So you don't distance from something, but you don't really think
there's nothing that you're right in a certain way. There's nothing that you're distanced from. Exactly. You put it exactly right? That there's this self-distance, but the two things that are at odds with themselves, like they're the thing that this substantial identity that you're alienated from, it doesn't exist. So it is a kind of, you're alienated from a symbolic status, not a substantial status. So I think that's what you added there is really important, I think.
But the alienation from, it's kind of getting a little bit complex, but the alienation from the symbolic status, so like, I'm not in that group, or I am in this group, which means I'm not in this group.
Right, or even more things that are more personal, right? Like your name, your like I'm a professor, like even that, I'm a parent, like that, I'm a son, even that, like all those things, all those kinds of symbolic identities. That's what, to me, that's what a key thing to alienation. Like it means you're always at a distance from whatever those are, even though, as you say, they don't have any substantial identity themselves.
And it seems they're always immediately at least a dualism. I don't mean like explicitly dualism. They're at least that a priori relational. If they come into existence, it's relational.
It's relational, right? So it's interesting. And when you put it that way, it makes clear, I think, the priority of alienation, right? Like there has to be the distance, even for the identity. Like the distance is actually prior to and constitutive of whatever the identity is. And I think that gets denied when you really, if I can put it this way, identify with the identity, you think you are the identity, then you miss that way in which that distance is, that divide is prior to it.
Okay. So you're not as explicit about your usual big influences in this book, but I will draw in so, if I'm understanding it right, I'm sort of prodding your Lacan knowledge here again, just because I think he works well for this discussion actually a little bit. But the mirror stage, right, this seeing of the self, but was just inherently in relation to the other. I mean, here there isn't what is before that. You seem to not subscribe, absolutely not subscribe to any form of like primitive consciousness or like some prior state. So there's never a before. We're always with alienation. We're always caught in the middle.
We're always caught in the middle, right? I mean, I think that's. It's interesting. Look for Lacan on this. He redefines. So Freud thinks that we begin in this autoerotic stage, right? And for Lacan, like our opening position is like complete. It's not that we're so like we think of ourselves as everything, right? Like I think that's a common conception. Lacan's idea is, no, actually, we begin completely subsumed to the other, so in a certain sense, the other is us. So Lacan kind of does begin with an idea of alienation, I think, not far from what I'm saying. So, yeah, I think he's a good reference point. And then you're right, like mirror stage, you're alienated in the mirror, of course, but then it's not even you that becomes the first form of identity. I can remember like I am sure everybody did this. I'm not sure I'm not more neurotic than most. Maybe I am in some ways, but not in this way. I would see people that I thought were cool and I would emulate like their ways of talking or even standing or just gestures.
I was a different person after leaving the cinema. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
The film is literally like I'm having this relationship, and I'd leave and I'd have some new like tick or like saying.
Exactly.
And if you were cute, you could notice your friends like,
you could
know
see
where
it,
you've got that.
No, it's great. The cinema, it's a great example. I remember seeing Towering Inferno, and I wanted to like have that look of Steve. I didn't look anything like Steve McQueen, but I wanted to be as cool as Steve McQueen. So yeah, I mean, I think that's so that would seem to be like that's sort of Lacan's basic idea, and I think that certainly fits in with what I'm saying.
So very slippery because we're caught in a bind. We're alienated. So we're constantly alienated from something that we presuppose as a self, which also I think the word that is synonymous in this context is wholeness, or I want to find myself, which denotes like a once this is found, then I'm whole.
Yeah.
But this just ain't a thing for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Like, I think not only do I think it's not a thing, I think it's pretty destructive, actually. Like, I think it's really, like, I think it causes us to miss, I don't mean to sound too sentimental, but like what makes life worth living, right? Like, I think that the times of alienation are really the times that are valuable to us. And then like when you seek to cure it through some kind of wholeness, I mean, this is maybe the book where I have the biggest beef with Marxism, right? Because it is this kind of like, to me, this sort of like one of what Marx inveighs against is alienation in capitalism. And my claim is no, actually, capitalism is all bent on hiding our alienation from us. And so I'm trying to reverse that. And so I think any attempt to find ourselves, individually or as a society, I think is really, it's misleading. And then it ends up, because you never can do it, then you end up saying, well, someone is to blame for me not finding myself. And then that's a bad situation to be in.
So you see it more as destructive that the wholeness presupposes it like a failure almost of being.
Yeah, exactly. And then what do? You have to lash out against those that are responsible for that failure. I mean, I would just say to people, like, read Heidegger's Black Notebooks and look at the role that the Jew plays in the forgetting of being, right? Like, he wants to return to being. It's funny you said the word being. That's what triggered this in me. And it's like, he calls it Weltjudentum, right? Like world Jewery, like, which is a Nazi word. And he thinks that's what's to blame. So I think you get in this kind of like, even a thinker as great as Heidegger, you get into, once you think of this like something primal, like being or whatever it is that has a kind of wholeness attached to it, then you end up, in a destructive spiral, I think.
Okay. I've noted down a film that I want to mention when we get to the discussion more relating to, it's my least favorite film of all time. So
good.
Remind me.
Good.
So, but before we get to like,
I hope it's not "Don't Worry, Darling," because that's
no, it's well, I'll mention it now, but we'll get to it. It's Pursuit of Happiness. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah,
Dear me.
Yeah.
You'll see where I'm going. You can already see where I'm going with that. But before we do the capitalism, Marxism thing, because you even mentioned really the alienation does change here, especially with consumer capitalism. I want to mention like the Buddhist angle. I genuinely do because yeah. So to use a little Lacanian word, and I was like, man, I'm so clever for using this. You see selves, and for those not watching, quotation marks, like the self is a quilting of alienations. So, I am you are a professor, which also means I'm not, and I have a distance from all of these things. Yeah. I'm a son, etc., etc. Like so the self is like a quilting of alienations, which is really like what the Buddhists would say is like, well, if you keep going into each thing, each desire, and each suffering, there is nothing at the bottom of this. But for you, the difference would be like just lean into all these contradictions, lean into all this distance and contradiction. Don't go searching for the non-root of this all.
Right. I don't think you can get to that. Right.
No.
So that's what, So I think like what you have is the trouble, right? Like the pain of the alienation, like that, because it's both the pain of the alienation and it's also the satisfaction. There's a certain kind of, all your satisfactions are wrapped up in that too. So I mean, that's another thing I'm trying to do in this book is to link, obviously, this may be obvious, like to link the way in which we're alienated to what's satisfying to us. right? Like and that I think we get this idea that finding ourselves or finding something, that's where satisfaction lies. But to me, it's more in the alienation itself, right? Like the pain of that is also the sort of joy of it, if I can.
It's like the Twilight Zone episode where the guy goes to heaven and he gets everything he wants.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's actually hell.
It's hell. Yeah.
So
which I thought The Good Place was going to do, but it didn't do that. It didn't quite.
That had so much potential on it. It
did. Yeah, it could have done that, and then it kind of went off the rails at the end. But yeah,
maybe that's what heaven is like. This almost 70%. You're almost there, but you still have the.
Yeah, I like that. I like 70%.
But it's not. It's definitely not 30. Like you can't be miserable, but it's.
Right. Yeah. I know. Because of course, James, right? Like there is like real misery. And then real depression, like when you're so distanced from anything, right? And then people kill themselves. Like I really believe, like I almost think suicide is a calculation of like, it's not this rational probably, but is the satisfaction level so diminished that it's not worth going on, right? And I think versus the suffering level. And so I think there's the point is those are both dialectical. Like they interdepend on each other. But you can go, just like you're saying, you can go down to the 30%, like you can go down to the 1%. And then, it's hard to say. I think most of us would say like, yeah, how can you tell that person to go on? Right. Like I don't. So I mean, I know people think like, suicide, we should do whatever we can to prevent. I guess, but part of me thinks like
I'll take the controversial view of myself on this, because I think a lot of that rhetoric comes from actually a selfish point of view from the people, because there's a discomfort of people doing that. It's like it's against all social foundations. It's right. But so it's like, please don't do it. But there's nothing in those conversations that ever says it's always just don't do it. It's never like we actually understand, like. For people to imagine like they've got to a place of suffering that will take them actually to that level. That's never in the conversation. It's always just don't do it. Like my favorite example of this is that it was like done in America where there's a lot of skyscrapers, and on top of the buses they actually had an advert for like a job finding website. It was like, please don't do it, you have opportunities, which is like the what, like someone about to jump, and then it's like,
that would make me jump.
It's like, I could go get a lovely 9 to 5. But I want to.
No, I'm completely with you on this. Like, I think you're right. Like a lot of the rhetoric around that is just about, it's also about it's like a wrench in capitalist productivity, right? Like, I mean, there were societies where it was not uncommon at all. And for people, so I don't have to imagine it. I've felt that way before. So for me,
But I like kind of controversially as well, though, I want to tackle the other end of that spectrum, because we're talking about like, doing percentages here, which is very pragmatic, but like you get down to 0%, like there's absolutely no satisfaction. So the pragmatic, this decision is built from something there. But it's also a bit of a horseshoe there, because this is why I wanted to mention Pursuit of Happiness. So for people who haven't seen this film,
don't see it.
How would you even describe it? It's pure propaganda.
It's pure propaganda, right?
It's kind of like Will Smith's like embodying the capitalist dream, and basically the moral of the story is like, if you grovel enough, you will obtain the pursuit of, or you succeed in the pursuit of happiness, which in this case is basically just becoming, what is he in the end? Like just like a middle manager in some.
Yeah. It reminded me of that. You probably didn't see it in where you are, but there's this ad, and like it was like turn of the millennium. It was like for this company Monster.com. Mm-hmm. They had these little kids. It was in black and white. These little kids would go like, I wanna be forced into early retirement. And then this other guy goes, I want to work my way up to middle management. All these things that like no one would want, because Monster was like an employment thing or something. So they were like, But anyway, the ad was amazing. But it's like that. I think I talked about this ad somewhere, and I said if Marx had seen this ad, he would have just said, "Okay, it's over. Capitalism won. This is the greatest ad ever." It's like, but I feel like that film is like that. Like you're like, I'm going to work my way up to middle management, and that's like happiness.
Well, the reason I say that is because I think to do with alienation and wholeness is it's a film about wholeness. But it's a typical Zizek thing. I mean, Zizek would say this about the Titanic, right? Like, we need to see the next bit. Pursuit of happiness, right? This is like kitchen sink realism after the orgy, right? Like, all right, you get this little moment. He gets his little moment, but it's like, okay, well, can I see the next 2 or 3 years? Because if you've achieved wholeness, that's when things get interesting. Because he's still got 50 years.
I know. I think ideology in Hollywood is primarily the decision of when to end the film, right? Like, just like you're saying, like it just ended too soon. Slavoj said an interesting thing I think he said it to me. I don't know if he said this publicly. He's like, the sequel to Titanic is this film Revolutionary Road, where Winslet and DiCaprio come back together. They have this terrible marriage and she ends up dying. So it's like, it's really like that would be the end. He and I argue about Titanic because I do like the fact that I like this gesture at the end. I don't know if you remember it. They're like going around like, what's your name? And her mother has said like, we don't have any money. All we have is our name. And then she goes, I'm Rose Dawson. Yeah. And so she takes up his name, which is kind of like this symbolic suicide. So I like that. I think there's things about it that are.
You think they'd have stayed together?
No, but I don't think she wants to stay with him. Like, do you remember the thing where she goes, I'll never let you go, and then she drops him into the depths of the ocean. So I think I kind of think Titanic's a nice little feminist tale, and about the feminist betrayal of feminism for wealth. Like that, I think like that also is part. Remember, because she has all those suitcases that she brings on the ship in the very beginning. So I think there's some things going on there that are more than he gives it credit for.
Okay.
But I think about that, he's right. It ends too soon, and let's see. You got to see Revolutionary Road.
Okay. As a very vague statement, but as a society, though, like this is on almost all levels. Everything is about momentary wholenesses. When we get there, then we'll like once we've done the airport, done the check-in, done the taxis, done the packaging or whatever, blah blah blah. Once we get to the hotel, then the holiday starts. Like then we're in, and everything's to do with this. Maybe even on a daily, monthly, recurrent basis, and then it's like right now back to work, and then. What is it?
Right.
Thank God it's TGI Fridays, and there's always momentary senses of wholeness. But I mean, there's an unspoken sense of wholeness that no one could define.
Right. Exactly.
That isn't real.
I think that's right, and I think it's interesting how those illusory, momentary senses of wholeness sustain people. Right. Like I think most people would accept that they're momentary, but they'd be like, well, that. But I want to say, no, even that doesn't happen. Like even those moments that you think are moments of wholeness are themselves like still rife with alienation. And thank God they are, because if they were moments of wholeness, they'd be moments of death. Like they would not be moments of even relaxation. Like I think even relaxation is alienating. So I'm not for like, constantly, tormenting yourself, but I think it's like a shift in how you're thinking about like what you're striving for.
Well, this is the other Buddhist element in your book, that everything's I mean, speaking of Western philosophy, you are anti-Parmenides. You're Heraclitus through and through. Yeah. You're a Heraclitean extremist. Like
I am
constantly moving.
Like Hegel, though, right? Like Heraclitus in the History of Philosophy, he's writing History of Philosophy. He goes, we get to hear Heraclitus. He goes, here we see land. Like, like there's a moment. Like, okay, now we're cooking.
Yeah. Now the big thing, the shifting to this difference between sort of the abstract alienation that we've been speaking about through to capitalism, modern day, modernity, whatever you want to call it. I think the thing that I saw possibly in your book is that this different type of alienation, which is kind of being utilized by capitalism, this doesn't allow catharsis. So there's like something to be said for, let's say, like you grew up in a oppressive religion and then you finally build the courage to move from one alienation to another, but you get this sense of like letting go, of relief, of ultimately catharsis. Capitalism doesn't, no one's, at the moment, no one is getting catharsis from our extremely fragmented, it's always like addition, it's always
right.
Purchase.
Even Elon Musk, like even the richest person in the world, like he's still constantly striving and constantly like at odds with himself, right? So I think you're right. I think capitalism doesn't allow for that, but I think it does. I mean, this is my argument, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. But my argument is that it does hold out this promise of a non-alienated future, and that's really the key to one of the keys to its hold over us. So that's where I think it's most pernicious, I guess.
For Marxists, though, that's a pretty positive statement, I think, because in our last discussion, you mentioned how like Trump needs the war, or he needs like, you need the alienation, you need the problem, otherwise there is no need for Trump, etc., etc. And most things work in this way, that like then dialectic. But you're talking about Musk, and you're talking about going to space, and like always the next frontier for capitalism, surely an acceleration. But in this sense, then, each big step is going to really be a further deflation of capitalism, because we have to keep confronting the fact, like, space is going to be a big one, I think. Like, what if we, I don't think we're going to get to Mars, and I don't even mean that in a pessimistic sense. I just don't think it's going to happen. But what if we get to Mars that's just a bit boring?
It's going to be. It's going to be worse than Earth, clearly, right? I don't know. I saw The Martian. It seemed not so great. Although I like that movie a lot. I just feel like, I think that's right. Like, I think that's true of every capitalist frontier, isn't it? Like that it doesn't, it's not so great until we kind of make it more like what that's their dream, is to make Mars somewhat like Earth and give us a new, but I think that would be that's maybe the ultimate dream, is some kind of terraforming thing, right? Like they could develop that. That seems very far-fetched to me, but I tend to agree with you about that. Like, I think that the more capitalism develops, the more it confronts its failure to deliver on this promise of a non-alienated future, right? Like, I think that is true. And I think that's why, there's so much discontent today. It's interesting that it manifests itself primarily in right-wing populist movements, right? I mean, almost exclusively. There's not really a leftist movement anywhere in the world, but which suggests that, see, to me, that's like the real.
There's not a leftist movement anywhere in the world.
Well, substantial, is there? That really is a chance to like. Okay. Maybe I'm misspeaking, because I think in South America there's some, that would be the place, right? That there are some, but Venezuela's not a leftist movement.
Well, also just to be a bit coy, what do you see Democrats as?
Well, they're liberal. They're fine, but I don't think they're like a leftist project. I thought I was wrong about this. I worked on his campaign. Like, I thought Obama was a leftist, like had a chance to be like a leftist. And then certain things happened that showed that wasn't the case. But yeah, so again, like, I have some friends in Colombia, and they have in Chile. So there's some leftists maybe in South America, but there's also there's some disastrous things in South America. But Europe, the development is clearly in right wing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Everywhere. And even in Britain, right, it's like, okay, Labour's in power, but it's not certainly no one would say it's a leftist version of Labour that's in power. So there's that.
So it's not really Labour.
So it's not really, even Labour is probably the wrong term for it, I think, with Stammer. But anyway, I feel like that, but there is this humongous like dissatisfaction with the capitalist world that's expressed in almost every country in the form of some kind of right-wing populist reaction. And it's always like, it seems like it's always, I mean, it's not overtly anti-capitalist, but it's like, we need to put up trade walls. We need to do these kinds of things. And like Brexit even was certainly that. So yeah, I think that there is, and I think it bespeaks what you were talking about, this kind of like capitalism gets to these points that seem like barriers where it doesn't realize its promises, right?
Do you think this is where a notion, because you speak about place a lot in your book, do you think this is what a lot of this disappointment is becoming, is sort of an attempt at a forced construction of place?
Yeah. I mean, I think all these movements are an attempt to reassert place, right? Like that's what they are. They're like, no, we're a place, and you can't, like the anti-immigrant thing, it's all about place, right? It's all about, this is our place. We belong here. We're not alienated here. And these other people are coming, eating our cats. I don't know if you saw this.
They're eating the pets, folks.
Yeah, eating the pets. Right. And it's like, I mean, like, as if, it just, that bothered me so much, just because I have a soft spot in my heart for Haiti, because it's like, it's a country that suffered the most in the history of humanity. So, and like the only successful slave revolt, and then they are punished for subsequently 220 years. So I didn't want to see them blamed. But I feel like that a reassertion of place is really, I mean, I think to me, that's what this book is writing against more than anything. Like this reassertion of like, place, like we are rootedness. Like, can we be rooted in the soil? And like, I mean, the Nazi Bluten Boden, like that's all about the same thing.
Would you say there has never been places then?
No. I don't believe that. I believe we're always uprooted from our place. Like no one has a place. And again, this is probably my prejudice, because I grew up in a place no one would want to be from. And the people around me, no one would want to have them as relatives. So I felt that immediate uprootedness like right away. But I feel like it's true all universally. Yeah. And I think place is always reactionary. Like the call for like place and having a place is always a problem.
What do you think of supposed places then, but prior to their acknowledgement as a place, if you see what I mean? Because I think
I don't.
Okay. Well, I think the death blow for many ideals is at the point where they become self-referential. So we could use Trump, or we could use also many other right-wing reactionary things where they start to going back, or like you're acknowledging the explicitness of the place that you're alienated from. Whereas I do think there would have been times in history where, all right, you might be uprooted in yourself or something, but you are part of a nation, and there are a general people, but there isn't that self-acknowledgement. You're not waking up and going like, I am in the United Kingdom, right? Like, but now we've moved into this era of like, you wake up and it's like, right, we just got to do this, and then I will be in this place.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No?
I understand what you're saying now.
No.
I don't think so. I think actually that what you're saying is we're now in this reflected relation to place, right? And there used to be a kind of like organic relation.
Yeah.
I think actually there's something more revelatory about the reflected relation, because I think the organic is more deceptive, because you're like, okay, I'm here. I'm not even thinking about the fact that I'm whatever part of this tribe or whatever I am. Like, I'm just part of it.
But you wouldn't even think that though, right? Like,
no, I don't think that. I think even then you just haven't seen your alienation.
Yes, because it's not until many would say, not until like there is a pressure on the supposed orders.
But fine. But that's why I think good for that pressure, good for that disruption, because it makes clear to us this is like, to me, like Freud, to me, his great book is Civilization's Discontents, right? And in that book, he says there is a fundamental antagonism between the individual and its society, right? And he says it doesn't matter how nice the society is, how great it is, how organic it feels. And I think that's true. And I think it's true no matter how, like a hunting gathering, same for them as for like people.
I think no. I do think it's different for hunting and gathering, and I'll tell you why. Because this is the argument against John Zerzan and primitivism. At a certain point, we didn't have signification. But I think that's the point where you can say,
okay,
right?
well, that's a different thing.
Well, no, the only reason I mention that, I'm not trying to be like tricky, is because you make this clear in the book. You basically say like, as soon as there is signification,
right, you
have alienation,
right?
Which I think is a great statement.
No, I think it's absolutely true, right? So like right now, humanity has a monopoly on alienation, but it's very likely, right? I don't know who would it be first, like I don't know, some kind of apes would gain signification, like in Planet of the Apes, or some kind of robot form would gain significance, and then they would be alienated too. So I don't think it's not like I don't even think it's a human monopoly. It is now, but I don't think it's necessarily one.
So just jumping back a little bit to capitalism, this is the typical line, I mean, Zizek would say, easier to imagine the end of the world. I can't remember who it was who said capitalism will eat itself.
I think Marx said that.
Okay. Dear me. Would you say that the McGowan is capitalism will disappoint itself?
I think that's true. Yeah, that's very good. I wish I would have said that. Yeah,
you can have it. We get it. I feel like we're getting close to that because capitalism seems to have this problem of, like we said before, this whole percentages thing. It's always just a bit too much. Like everything's, for many people, once again, for many people it isn't. But for the majority of people in Western modernity, things are too good.
Yeah.
We're too comfortable. We're not happy though.
It's just disappointing. Right.
It's disappointing.
Right.
But it's disappointing because the supposed wholeness is easy.
Yeah, well, the supposed wholeness isn't.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? I think
so.
That's
You're
the
constantly
thing that's disappointing, right? Like if you expect alienation, then the failure of wholeness isn't disappointing. But if you expect wholeness, then the failure of wholeness is disappointing. And I think the problem is like every new commodity has that promise attached to it, and so you how many things do you have to buy before you're like, wow, this isn't working, this whole prospect. So I feel like that's a real lacuna in the capitalist structure.
How do you think it is that capitalism manages then to, for billions of people, string them along for a lifetime?
Well, it's an interesting thing, James, I think. So you have the double thing, right? Like you have the promise of the wholeness, but then there's my view is that the way we find satisfaction is through sacrifice and loss. So we're constantly sacrificing and losing in the capitalist system, but we're not consciously aware of that. But that is what's generating our satisfaction with the system. While at the same time, consciously, we're holding out for this promise of wholeness that we got from the object or the commodity. So that's what I think is actually the genius of the system. That it, on the one hand, generates satisfaction through a continual series of failures, but on the other hand, holds out for consciousness this fantasy of you can get this promise of like complete enjoyment, complete satisfaction. So that's why I think it's, if it ends up destroying the planet before it destroys itself, which is very possible, I think that'll be why, because it has that kind of double logic that really is effective in keeping people tied to it and tied to always trying to get more, et cetera.
Do you think so that a classic example here, drawing in on, I know Zizek's a fan, but someone like a character such as Bartleby Scrivener, is he overcome wholeness?
Yeah. I think I disagree with Slavoj about his political bearing, but yeah, I think he's kind of given up the idea of wholeness and accepted his alienation.
But there's something, for people who don't know, this is Herman Melville's Bartleby, who is basically saying, he's basically to modernize it. He's at his 9 to 5 and then just makes the decision to reply, I would prefer not to everything. Checks out. But there's something, could one overcome wholeness or let it go? This false notion of wholeness, but not be as seemingly, because Bartleby isn't really happy,
No, he's not happy.
He's not engaged in life.
Right. He's just, see, that's the thing I kind of don't like about him. Like I find him apolitical as a figure, and Slavoj wants to make him the apolitical into the political. And I get it. But my friend Russ Sabriglia, he has a critique. He's not an enemy of Slavoj. He's a friend of his, but he has a critique saying Slavoj needs to read the story better because it's really the narrator who is the hero of the story, not Bartleby. So it's a very interesting kind of take. But I feel like, yeah, I mean, I think that's and it's not, we should just be clear, it's not just Slavoj. It's like a ton of people, contemporary thinkers, like a Gomben, like Bartleby's like a Deleuze, like there's a ton of people that think Bartleby is a model, political model. And I feel like he doesn't, like, I think you're kind of getting at it, right? Like he's not engaged. And I feel like embracing, to use my little jargon, I think embracing alienation means being engaged. It doesn't mean like dropping. Like I was never I'm too young anyway to have been alive then, but I was never a Timothy Leary kind of, drop out, whatever that is.
Tune
in, drop out, whatever. Yeah. That was never my thing. And I feel like that Bartleby's a little bit like that, right? Like he's kind of dropping out. And I feel like I get what Slavoj's doing with that. Like he's trying to say, you got to drop out of this project of symbolic recognition, right? That's what he's really saying. Okay, I agree, but I think there's still like a way of like alienation gets you engaged. It's not like dropping out. And I think it's important to be engaged. I mean, not engaged in the capitalist project, but engaged in your existence and engaged in other people. And that I think is vitally important, right?
Maybe this metaphor might not work, but like to embrace alienation, I'll go back to Heraclitus, right? Like, so you would say embrace alienation. You would say like, don't even stand in the river, like just lay down and you got to engage with the river, but it's always going to be flowing, accept that. Whereas Bartleby's kind of he's like on the, I don't know what he's doing there.
He's like on the shore. Like I think he steps out of the river, right?
And he's not even looking at it anymore. It's just weird.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. And that's why the narrator doesn't really know what to do with him, right? Like he's like, I don't know what to do with this guy. Like he doesn't, like, it'd be, this would be too cliched, I guess, but it'd be like organized a strike at the among the clerks or something. But he just doesn't, like, there's no engagement in him. And so I feel like to me, that's a little disappointing. But he's kind of like stepped out of the river or something.
Yeah.
Like he's more, I mean, to get back to our little opposition, he's more Parmenidean than he is Heraclitan, I think, right?
I think it's done. He's accepted it. Yeah. I mean, I think he could do a strike, but he'd have to write in there something like, if it succeeds or not, it doesn't matter. Like,
it doesn't matter.
Something was, well, I don't know, but then that doesn't really.
I don't think he would do a strike. I just think because he's opting out of even engaging his fellow law clerks, right? Yeah. Like his fellow scriveners.
I can't remember what happens in the end. Does he die? He dies, doesn't he?
I can't remember the end either. I think he does die finally.
Because I think they have to leave him be in the building, and
yeah, he just starves to death. He can't even eat.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happens when you're not. Yeah. So how do you embrace alienation? Do you feel you've fully embraced alienation? Do you have some remnants of wholeness?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. For me, I think it's the. Here's what it is. It's like the compulsion with which I write things, and And the other thing is I have a terrible time. I love coming on your thing. So this is not referring to you in any way.
It's fine
But
if it is.
I have a terrible
Ruined my
time.
wholeness.
I have a terrible time saying no to requests. So I like end up like being strung out and just like, I just have like, I basically over the last, I don't know, month, I've had like not even a night. So I don't even have an hour at night of like free time to unwind, like I'm doing work right up till I go to bed. So that's my, and it's kind of crazy, but that's my kind of way of like, I can't, I like think like, oh, if I do this, I mean, clearly I don't think this consciously, but I think if I just do if I do this one, it'll kind of make everything work out. And I just need to say no to that. So so I definitely, I mean, the book is it's more like a self-help book to myself than it is to anyone else.
That comes across as like a duty though, less than a wholeness, like an ongoing process of giving everything.
For sure.
That's
no, I don't.
Like you said, like it's sacrifice. I don't mean to psychoanalyze you, but if you stopped, you'd be miserable, right? Like after like a couple of days,
I'd be terrible. Yeah.
You'd go get some creamy and then be like, damn.
Yeah, that's right. I like to use the Vermont word there.
You said that's what's good. It was a front.
Yeah. No one else. Everyone else thinks it's some kind of obscene sexual.
There was one guy commented on that video, and he got angry. He said there never has been such a thing as a creamy. So
yeah, he needs to come to Vermont. Everybody, there's not a resident. There are not that many residents in Vermont, but there's not a resident here that doesn't know what a creamy is. So.
Yeah. I want to ask you this big question because I think you were marching towards it in your book, and I was like, he didn't wrap this up even though he threw it in. So we have all these revolutions in philosophy, like from the Copernican revolution, then we go through to the Kantian revolution. Every time we're getting more and more decentered, and then we go through so it's always like we're not the center of the universe, we're not the center of our spatiotemporality. Then Freud, we're not really actually the center of ourselves, the unconscious. Some people say then Deleuze and Guattari, like there's this another angle. We're not even the center of like society or economy.
Right.
We can cast that one aside because I think you were leaning towards that there's some new revolution that's like, are we going through a revolution of alienation?
Huh. I would like that we would. I don't. Do you think we are? I don't know. I mean, I mean, maybe. I mean, look. The one thing that makes me think that might be true is this incredible Hegel revival we're in the midst of living through. I mean, maybe this hasn't disseminated to the larger public, but at least among a certain number of people, it's like kind of incredible, like the number of books being written on Hegel and this kind of re-understanding of him. And he's the real, to me, this comes across in the book, I think, he's the real thinker of alienation and as a positive thing. Like he's not explicit about that in the way that I am.
Could you explain that in brief?
Yeah. So he thinks that like the whole book really is, I'm thinking of Phenomenology of Spirit, is really about how it's that we develop or we move forward through all the ways in which we find ourselves alienated. And so every time we feel like we've gotten to some kind of wholeness, what his analysis will do is show, wait a minute, you thought that was wholeness, but there's really an alienation that's subtending that and is going to explode it. And then he gets to the end and he gets to absolute knowing, and everyone's like, okay, here it's kind of like everything fits together. But that's not what happens. It's about absolute knowing is this acceptance of a fundamental alienation. So, I mean, again, he doesn't put it that way, but that's what he's, to me, my mind, saying. So I feel like that's why Marx was such a shift, right? Because for Marx, all of a sudden, alienation becomes pejorative. It becomes like you say, alienation means something bad. And for Hegel, I think it meant like this, the word for him was Entfremdung, like distance from strange from ourself, right? And I think then Marx turns that into a bad thing. And I think that, to me, is maybe where things went awry. And like, are we now getting in touch with that? I hope so. I mean, I feel like there's certain indications of that at different points. Like, I'd like to think that there are indications of that in what we watch. You know, like I think Better Call Saul is a great show about embracing alienation at the end.
How,
right? Like,
how so?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I think so both characters. So I forgot the woman's name. Kim. Yeah. So Kim is a character who kind of does the right thing throughout the show, and then he realizes, and I think like he realizes that he's been trying to make himself whole throughout the series, right? And then he gets to the end, and she doesn't do that. Like, she's constantly kind of doing the right thing, even though it's costing her her job, costs her money, costs her everything. And then he kind of converts to her thing, and then and realizes for the first time, I have to accept my alienation and not try to, like, for him, interestingly, being Jimmy is a way, like being Saul is a way to overcome his alienation. And then when in the end they're all saying Saul, Saul, Saul on that bus, and he's like, no, it's Jimmy. Like he takes back this name, but then it means when he testifies and frees her, he basically condemns himself to prison when he could have gotten out of it. And I think he's saying, like, I'll accept this alien status of being in prison, right? I think it's just one of the most, I don't love the end of Breaking Bad, but I think the end of Saul is like one of the most beautiful, great endings ever. And I think maybe some of these television series, like I think Mad Men has a little bit of this embracing alienation in it at points. And I think some of these shows, like they're maybe, because I think the problem is that at the cinema, what predominates is the superhero who is the absolute figure of wholeness, right? So that's the disaster. I had the total misfortune of seeing Deadpool and Wolverine this summer. It was a nightmare. But again, why was it so bad? Because they're both figures of wholeness. They can't even be hurt, right? Like, they're so whole. Like, how can you have a fight with people that can't be hurt? It's not even interesting. And so I think, like, in a way, maybe what we were talking about, this is like exhaustion of capital and the exhaustion of the wholeness, to me, that was like the objective correlative of what you were saying, because I'm watching this film, I'm like, why are people interested? And the interesting thing to me is my students were like, well, there were some good quips. It was very cynical. And I'm like, that's a pretty low bar.
Everything's cynical.
Everything's cynical. I know, everything's cynical. You know, I was teaching Beyond Good and Evil. And Nietzsche says, cynicism is the only point at which base souls approach honesty. And I thought, you know, I like a lot of what Nietzsche says, but I think that's terrible. Like, I think cynicism is one of the greatest lies that we tell ourselves. Like, I think it really.
Well, the cynical logic, I mean, I'm thinking about this a lot at the moment, because I think this is to do with the disappointment that we've been talking about with alienation.
Yes.
We're at the stage of cynical logic which believes that if you're sat on the couch laying back watching, like, have you seen Spaced or any other of these sitcoms where it's about like, right, you're watching people on a screen who are like sitting back on a couch being lazy, eating Cheetos. You're sitting back on the couch eating Cheetos, but you're like, yeah, man, like, cynical logic. I know, I get the joke, but it's like, it's not a joke, because, but we're at that stage of cynical logic where we believe that if we are like self-aware or self-acknowledging, it's not alienation, self-acknowledging like the irony, you're somehow beyond it. And that lasts for so long, and it gets really clever, and it's just not.
It's terrible. I think it's one of the most dangerous things, James. Like, I really do, because it allows you to keep doing the thing, whatever it is, without any kind of, it like takes away it's precisely, you're right. I mean, what you said is exactly right. It takes away the alienating feeling of continuing to do the thing, because you think you're above it. You think you're beyond it. You think you're looking down on it, right? So Yeah. So I think cynicism is maybe the greatest danger today.
Yeah. We see this a lot, though. We see this a lot because I hear this in like I'm sure there's people who've said this to you, but where they'll like go buy something, or they've just bought a new car, and they'll say, maybe that'll fill the void in my life, right? And it's like, stay with the pain of that. Like, don't do the ironic quip, because that.
Right.
I think Breaking Bad's a fantastic. There's 3 endings there, really, though, right? Because I thought Better Call Saul. There's this huge thing now with TV shows just not wanting. They're like, we got the money, we'll keep going.
I know, don't you think like end at the right time?
Well, because what we've been talking about with ending at the right time is you get a slice. You get a slice, and you don't get the wholeness that they can impose on it. Because like, what was it called? The Jesse Pinkman film.
Oh, it's about the car.
It's an alchemy, right? And it's like the most like pop the balloon.
I know,
like, and it's all ham-fisted, and like they're like, well, we need a gunfight, but it's ultimately like, by the way, like it's like a 5-year-old wrote it, right? Like he gets away and goes to basically Dream Eden,
Alaska or something,
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, man, why? So this wholeness is overflowing because it's like there's a problem of imagination there as well, because there was something exciting about the end of Breaking Bad, and you're like, get a feeling of like, I'm going to go off on my own now. And like, I wonder where Jesse, like.
I know, wonder where he's gone. Right. And I think, like, I thought the only thing about the end of Breaking Bad, I maybe have told this before, but my dream is that it ended when Hank is in the bathroom and looks at the leaves of grass and sees, and he's like, he knows, right? And then just cut, then that ends it, right? Like, I thought that would have been pretty great, because then you have to like do all this work of, it's like the opposite of like the Titanic ending, right? Where it like allows you to imagine like everything, like this nice future, but this would allow you to, it forces you to think like, what's he going to do? Like, how's he going to try to bust him and all
that? It forces you to, Sopranos, right? Forces you to confront alienation.
Right. I know.
Initially,
I hated the ending of Sopranos, and now I've totally come around. And so,
yeah, man. Yeah, this is, anything you want to add about alienation?
No, I think that the only thing I do want to add one little quip, because I mentioned the film earlier, and a little thing that I really think the film Don't Worry, Darling, like that film, I thought wildly underrated, and I thought it really like captured what I'm trying to do.
I'll have to watch it. Actually, you know what? I will add something in, because I know you've written about it a fair amount, I think. I might be wrong. I might be thinking of someone else. Considering the cynical reason, the cynicism thing we've been mentioning, do you see Fight Club as like extremely dangerous?
No, I think Fight Club is amazing.
But do you not think that's abiding by the cynical?
No, I do not think it's cynical at all. I think Fight Club, because we were talking about sacrifice, and like I think Fight Club avows, like Fight Club is about being hit. Right? It's not about hitting. And I think so many of the guys that love Fight Club, they miss that it's about this masochistic drive, right? And then, and it translates that into attempt to act politically. I don't think, where do you see the cynicism in it?
You're sort of living the fantasy of shoving away your 9-5 or sticking it to the boss or walking around with a bloody nose, or you've got this little secret club. You're living that through that, and that dispels the genuine feeling of it.
But they are trying to do something. They are like, they do bring down those credit buildings, right? I mean, I'm not suggesting we do that, but
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just as a recommendation, there's a great book on Fight Club by a friend of mine named Anna Kornblue, and it's called Marxist Film Theory and Fight Club, and she has a really good defense of that film.
This is a strange one to throw in just because it's one of my favorite films, so you might ruin it for me. Have you seen Harold and Maude?
Oh, I love Harold and Maude.
Do you think he should have stayed in his prior state then?
No, because isn't he? I think she's kind of teaching him to embrace alienation. Like I think he saw didn't he see, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought he saw death as this kind of like wholeness, kind of escape from his alienated status. And I think that's what she's kind of teaching him, to embrace alienation. I always felt.
That's fair. Because then,
I was shown that as a junior in high school in a class.
Really?
And the students were like on the verge of vomiting.
It's a strange film.
Because they couldn't
the sex scene?
stand the idea of the sex. Yeah.
But it's not even shown. What I love is like they show just basically the most like alluring cigarette smoking. And you're like...
They imagined it. So it was even worse.
They imagined.
It was just like, oh my God. I'm like, really? Like students were like, I'm sick to my stomach. I can't take it. So I thought I really appreciated that teacher for showing that.
It's fantastic. Hal Ashby is criminally underrated.
Yeah, criminally. Didn't he do Being There? Yeah.
Being There, man. Being There, it's like you're throwing out alienation all over the place. What would you...
Oh.
He's there. You know what? There's a great example of invert Bartleby, and you have... I can't remember his name in Being... Does he have? It's really... Chauncey Gardner.
Chauncey Gardner. Yeah. No, that's who's able to be a political figure, right? Like and I think, isn't he, I'm going to say the craziest thing now, like, isn't he like the Hegelian monarch? Like, all he does is like dot the I's and cross the T's because he's so stupid he can't do anything else. But he's like, that's the kind of president we need, right? Like, he's just there, he's just pure, just like not.
Well, he has a single frame of reference. Like, everything is a metaphor about growing plants,
but that is not a metaphor for him.
No, it's not a metaphor. And then, but it means that every single thing comes from a place of pure honesty. Like, there's no like cynicism, no questioning. Right. He'll just say like, if you water the plants, they will grow, and they're like, yeah, this is incredible.
I know. Yeah, that's it. Did he do? Or I'm wrong. No, he didn't do 5 Easy Pieces.
No, but it's got the same feel. And what do you? Because that's like my favorite film. So I have to. What's going on at the ending of 5 Easy Pieces? Do you think? Like, do you think he? I don't think he's accepted his alienation.
No, I think the ending.
He's really. Yeah. He's repressing his alienation.
Yeah. Because he has to stay with her for him to be accepting his alienation, and he's like going off to the Idaho frontier, right? Like he's trying to. That to me is always like the end of Huck Finn. I find noxious, right? Like I think that kind of thing is.
Well, he's like kind of hostile and violent a lot when he doesn't get to.
Right, he certainly is.
He needs to deal with some stuff.
Yeah, he does. but it's maybe the best. Don't you think it's maybe true? It might be the best film without a plot ever made, right? Like it has no plot at all. Like just a series of events, and it's
I'm trying to think about
pretty good.
There isn't many films that can pull that off.
No, I mean, it's Raffleson. It's Bob Raffleson. That's not.
Have you seen the film Leave No Trace?
I have. Yeah, that's kind of like that.
A bit of a.
That's a great film. It's a great film.
Fantastic film. Yeah. All right,
James. So great.
So, Embracing Alienation, why we shouldn't try to find ourselves, and also at the end there, or every film we mentioned, including the Titanic, it's a must-watch. This will be links for the book in the description below. Be alienated, get alienated. Yeah, accept it. What's your advice?
Yeah, that's what I say. Be alienated. Accept your alienation.
What about when you see a wholeness? Just before we finish that, like when you see.
Here's what I would say. See the alienation in the wholeness, right? Like don't fall for the illusion of wholeness. That's what I would say.
There we go. There's your ending. Todd McGowan, thanks again.
Thank you.